The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Every day we learn something new. That's the beauty of the stretch run. It is not boring. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everybody. I'm Dan Vespers. This is Tuesday, which means, I think you guys are all mostly aware now, a halfer. Tuesday's a half-length show. We got Monday to cover. We got Tuesday to preview. If there's anything large, we will get into it. I'm not going to cut the show off if something huge pops up. But barring any monumental occurrences, this is one of our 2 days of the week, Tuesday, Thursday, where we try to keep things a little bit trim, a little lean, focus on the box scores a little bit more, almost like an adjunct to our sister podcast, the Box Score Breakdown, that Adrian and Neil do such a wonderful job with, and focus on strategic decisions going forward. So pretty simple pod. I think this one will be a pretty short one. Last week, remember, we had a really big Monday card. This week, only the 7 games on Monday. And so what we can do now is hop right into those. First of all, by the way, I got to thank everybody for the new reviews on the podcast. Remember, like, a week and a half ago, I think I had noted that we were sort of not stuck. I hadn't been making much of a push for it. We were stuck. All right, fine. We were stuck. We were sitting at 180 for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, including a relatively not favorable review that came in sometime in January. Somebody was not happy that I kept relating things to my own fantasy team, which I understand. I totally get that feedback. And I sat there and I looked at it and I thought, this is reasonable. But at the same time, I think it's a good way to make connections. So I'll say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Connect this to what you're doing. I don't know what your team looks like. I can't legitimately tell you what to do on the podcast. So therein lies the dichotomy, the line I'm trying to toe as I go through sort of how to build your team. Well, anyway, I put that plea out to you guys, the new listeners in particular, because I know the older folks, those that have been with us since the outset here 2 and change seasons ago, you guys have largely already reviewed the pod. And lo and behold, 7 new ratings over the last week and a half. One of them with some kind words attached to it, but that's just a lovely bonus. So thank you guys. From 180 to 187 in just a few days. New goal is 190. See if we can get there. Again, obviously, I always prefer kind reviews. If you have something constructive that you'd like to reach out, feel free to shoot me a note on Twitter. I really do. I listen to everything. Legitimately, nothing gets written off. I will take your suggestions seriously. I just would prefer if you just told me, and I can do it this way. Writing a nasty review is a good way for me to get defensive. But even this one, even the nasty review I got last month, I know it sounds like I'm a little bit defensive, but I get it. I understand where you're coming from. You just have to try to see where I'm coming from as well. And if you don't know my style, maybe that was a little bit weird for you. In any event, thank you to those that have rated the podcast over the last week and a half. If any of you are still considering doing it, please do. It takes maybe 90 seconds. Remember last week I did it with my 2-year-old. I was going through the steps of how to do it. You go into the podcast app, search for the show, you scroll all the way to the bottom, et cetera, et cetera. Please do drop a nice review on us. We want to get to 190. I'd love to get to 200 before the regular season ends. And then we'll just keep trying to pile them up because that's how we grow. Monday night. Did I already tell you I'm Dan Vespers? I'm at Dan Vespers on Twitter. You guys know that already. At DanBesbri. Shout out, by the way, to the gentleman who created a Twitter handle that was, I made this for Hoopball. I made this account for Hoopball with the Twitter at Hoopadoop. I don't know who you are. I know you're a listener. That was hilarious. At Hoopadoop, I made this account for Hoopball. I know that a lot of people got a kick out of that as well, so thank you. That was a sunny spot on, not that anything was wrong with yesterday. Monday was totally fine. It was just sort of a fun interlude in the middle of the day. Brooklyn just absolutely throttled the tanking Mavericks, and this one, team puts up a $127. There are going to be some pretty decent fantasy lines. Karis LeVert moved to the bench and looked great off the bench, able to run the offense a little bit. He and Spencer Dinwiddie seem to play off each other a little bit better than does D'Angelo Russell, who was needed mostly for his passing in this game, the Nets could really do no wrong. Damari Carroll at 5 3-pointers, Kuric's at 5 3-pointers, LeVert had 18, 5, and 5. Dinwiddie had 16 and 5 and actually made 6 out of his 8 shots. This is a best-case scenario for this team. I still think that Dinwiddie is hanging around right near the periphery. He fills a need as a pickup if you need scoring, assists, and generally he'll get you to the free throw line and knock down a few. Missed a couple in this ball game. And LeVert looks a lot better with a little bit of freedom now. So that's kind of a nice side note on that ball game, too. A little bit of freedom goes a long way. There's this initial inclination when you see a guy come off the bench to think that he's now screwed. But a lot of times you sort of get him away from the guy where they have trouble coexisting. In this case, LeVert and Russell both want to be running the offense, and they can't. Certainly, my guy Dwight Powell coming in hot in this one. 5 3-pointers. I don't know where that was. He played 33 minutes in a blowout loss. They're just giving him all he can handle right now. He looks amazing. 6 boards, 6 assists. No defensive stats in this one, but I think we can forgive him. Getting 20 points on 7 shots is pretty efficient. So you're running him out there until the cows come home. He looks locked in, and he looks like he may even go higher than top 90, depending on how these minutes shake out, but it's a ton every night. And there's no one hurt. It's not like we can blame it on something. Love it. Luka Doncic might be the only other guy on that team worth owning. I guess you could make a case for Tim Hardaway Jr., but he's sitting right at the edges with some really brutal shooting. Miami, hanging on. They beat the Atlanta Hawks 114-113. Still have no idea what minutes for Kent Bazemore are going to look like when the Wings are healthy. Taurean Prince was out. John Collins was out. Omari Spellman's out for a month. So Vince Carter calmly hit 7 3-pointers in this ball game. Attaboy, old man Vince. I love that there are guys in the NBA that are older than me. It's all we ask for as we start to get up to the I think what you would call an athlete tailing off his prime. Dwayne Dedmon, still good. I even saw somebody asking me about a drop today. You can't, man. He's just rolling. Every night he puts up a nice line. Kent Bazemore was not bashful in this game. He took 16 shots, didn't make many of them. 18, 7, and 3 with a couple of 3-pointers. No defensive stats. We're sitting right in that same bucket where as long as somebody's out, he's very much worth using. From a night-to-night standpoint, I still have to assume that it's eventually both of the other wings that they want to get on the floor in Herter and Prince are actually going to be healthy. They just haven't been lately, and I don't know, maybe that's by design. I doubt it. With John Collins out and Omari Spellman out, Alex Len got another start and sucked, as we figured would happen at some point in the not-too-distant future. So it's Dedmon. It's Trae Young, who's been playing better of late. He had 8 ugly turnovers in this game, so that's not great. It's Baze when he's seeing the 25 to 27 minutes. And that's about it. And then Collins once he comes back. Prince has been iffy. The Miami side is one we were watching pretty closely. The left calf strain keeping Goran Dragic out of this ball game and sort of killing what momentum he had begun to build prior to that. He looked great coming back that knee surgery. I don't know what this means for him going forward. Dwayne Wade farewell tour had a nice stop in this one, and they needed it. 23 points for D. Wade, but, you're not picking him up. Josh Richardson shot the ball well. Justice Winslow did too. As his shot goes, so goes his fantasy value because his percentages are generally what kills you. Kelly Olynyk had foul issues, still put up a nice game. He had to come out about 4 minutes into the third quarter, so he was probably a good 6 minutes, I'd say, under where they wanted him to be in this ball game. So it could have been actually a really big game, like it has been, but I think you'll take 12, 5, and 1 with a block, 2 threes, making all of his free throws. He's a must-own guy as long as James Johnson is out, and we've heard nothing to suggest he's not. Meanwhile, Hassan Whiteside was listed as available in this game and then came off the bench after Udonis Haslem got 4 minutes. I can't figure that one out. Maybe Whiteside was in the toilet. But he ended up playing 15 minutes, where Adebayo played 20. And I'm betting that starts to shift back the other way because, frankly, Bam wasn't that good in this ball game. Whiteside also wasn't all that great in this game, but I would argue he was probably a little bit better than Bam tonight. or not tonight, excuse me, in Monday's game. I don't know if either one of them necessarily should be started right now, but you know how this goes with Miami. If Whiteside is healthy, he ends up playing more, or at least getting the starting gig. So Olynyk is a must-own guy. Winslow's not in 9-category leagues. I know he had a good ball game here, but if you look at his lines, there's rarely been a 2-week stretch where he's held top 100 value, generally because his free throws and his field goal numbers are not good. Points leagues, abso-freaking-lutely. Josh Richardson, yes, he's a go. Deion Waiters, no. Dwayne Wade, no. Bam, to me, is you could probably hold a game to see how this goes, but more than likely he's a no. Goran Dragic is a maybe. I'd love to see him play in the next ball game and get an idea of where they want his minutes to be. He could end up being really useful like a week and a half from now. Problem is, a week and a half from now is the 15th of March, and that's less than a month from the end of the regular season. And then finally, Derek Jones Jr. is one of the guys I've had my eye on, frankly, almost all season long. He got 18 minutes in this game, 8-4 with 2 steals. That's not enough. 18 minutes will not get the job done, unfortunately. We need to see him probably get into the 23 at minimum. 25 would be nice, and then he's cruising. Now, this is not close, unfortunately. He has the potential to do a lot in a short number of minutes, but 18 is too short. There's way too much random fluctuations when you're not playing that much, and you don't have that body of work. I've used Jonas Valanciunas as an example of it before. San Antonio got off to a big lead over Denver and ended up hanging on, if but barely. Nikola Jokic looked good. Jamal Murray looked good. Will Barton played okay. Paul Millsap was not great from the field, but saw the Lions' share of minutes. Gary Harris saw 26 minutes, Malik Beasley 22, and Beasley outplayed him substantially. So I continue to say I'm not sure that Gary Harris ever gets back up where it seemed like he would be. I think with Barton and Murray and those type of guys, their minutes are a little bit safer. Harris's minutes are almost up for grabs. The beauty of Gary Harris, at least, is that he's starting. We know what he can do when he's right. And so if you're starting and you're playing well, you have the first access to the bonus minutes. Whereas in this one, Malik Beasley, he ended up having a really good ball game. Had Denver known he was going to play really well, he probably would have started the game, but you just don't know with a bench guy until you're 7 minutes into the game. That's 7 minutes that are just gone. Poof, he can't play. And generally, guys don't play the last 17 minutes of a half, so there's a rest period thing. It's hard to be a bench guy and play 30 minutes. Your minutes have to be, you got to get into the game relatively early. You probably have to stagger things a little bit. So that's why Gary Harris has the edge there. I don't know that either one of them is somebody you can be using consistently right now. On the San Antonio side, DeMar DeRozan had a good ball game. Derek White has been terrific since coming back from injury. Rudy Gay got going off the bench, answering some of the questions about why his minutes have been down. Lamarcus Aldridge was fine. The guy we were actually watching was Jakob Poeltl. Since he's now started 3 games in a row, he picked up 2 early fouls and just sort of never got right. He played 5 minutes in the first quarter. He played, I think, another 2 or 3. Am I getting that right? In the first half. And then he saw like 10-ish in the second half. And 18 minutes isn't enough. The reason that we were interested in him is that he was up in the 25 to 28 range. We thought it might happen again against another big center in Nikola Jokic. It didn't, and this was a pretty ugly fantasy line. 6-3 with a steal. At least he made 3 out of his 4 shots, so it didn't totally crush your team, but that's not good. I still think there's a path for Poeltl to be a rebounds, defensive stats guy among these center pickups, but he certainly took a hit with the way he played in this ballgame and the fact that the Spurs now see a bunch of teams with non-traditional centers coming up. The Pelicans. So maybe this will give the Lakers some a small amount of comfort. The Pelicans, with Anthony Davis, who, by the way, played his butt off in this ballgame, went into Utah and won it, 115 to 112. AD had 15 and 11 with 6 defensive stats in 22 minutes. This is, of course, what you can still get out of Anthony Davis. It's actually kind of remarkable that despite the fact that he's barely playing, 20 minutes is not barely playing, But in his 22-ish minutes a game lately, he's still a top 50 guy. He's going half speed and he's top 50. Yes, obviously it stings like hell, but you certainly can't drop it. And anytime he's playing, you got to get him into your lineup. Of course, with him playing well in this one, he squeezed an extra couple of minutes out, and that hurt our guy, Cheick Diallo, who only played 17 minutes in this ballgame. Julius Randle slid over to play some center as well. Diallo struggled against the Jazz, as you might expect, a very big, strong veteran front court in Rudy Gobert and Derek Favors. I'm not punting on Diallo, though. I think he's going to be better in their next ballgame because who knows what's going to happen with Anthony Davis. Jahlil Okafor is out with a sprained ankle. The Pelicans would probably prefer to lose. I mean, this is insanity. When you're in that middle pack right now, you got to lose games. They played way too well. Julius Randle was awesome. Drew Holiday was awesome again. Elfrid Payton he was fine. And then you can't trust the other guys beyond, as we mentioned, I think Cheick is the guy you can throw in there. For Utah, Jolton Joe, Smoking Joe, 7 turnovers. Donovan Mitchell, 6 turnovers. If you're wondering why they lost this game, they lost the turnover battle by 10. Otherwise, line for Joe was actually pretty good. For Donovan Mitchell, good gracious. 8 out of 24 shooting. Oops. They got a bunch from Kyle Korver and Jay Crowder that actually kept him in the ballgame a little bit, but this was the Rudy Gobert show on that Utah side. By the way, guy I haven't talked about very much, Ricky Rubio. He really hasn't looked right since coming back from that hamstring deal, whatever it was, that cost him one game. Maybe he's a little bit dinged up. He's a top 100 guy in 9-cat this year, which is kind of crummy. 110-ish. I don't think you can punt on him after a couple of bad games. I get it. It's frustrating. You could bench him if you think he's not quite right, but you know he'll come bursting out at some point soon. And as if it wasn't hilarious enough that the Utah Jazz lost to the New Orleans Pelicans, the Phoenix Suns are showing that they're not just a one-trick pony, and they took care of business another time. After beating the Lakers, they come back and beat the Milwaukee Bucks. Obviously, it doesn't help Milwaukee that Chris Middleton has completely forgotten how to shoot a basketball. It also is crushing one of my fantasy teams. Good Lord, dude. Get it together out there. But DeAndre Ayton played much better in this ballgame. He's looked good for a couple in a row. Kelly Oubre was excellent. Tyler Johnson bounced back after I was getting ready to throw him into the scrap heap. Mikal Bridges did his same old stuff. He looks excellent. Some rebounds, not many assists in this one, but steals, threes, made his free throws. I mean, he's just like your prototypical 9-cat kind of guy. Devin Booker, 4 turnovers. If he can limit that number, then he can be fairly effective. This is a situation where Milwaukee just couldn't make a shot. I got to think this is the end of a long roadie without even looking at what's going on for them. Are they going home? Yeah, they're going home after this one. So they won in Chicago, Sacramento, and L.A., lost the god-awful back-to-back in altitude in Utah. This is one where they really needed to take a win back home, but they just weren't focused. They figured they could just come in and walk over Phoenix. A lot of teams have figured that lately. Most of them have. But Suns are awake. They woke up for 2. This game certainly buys another Tyler Johnson look. The 4 steals was a big deal for him. I'd love it if they actually let him get involved a little bit more. Have your point guard with a usage rate of only 15 is not excellent. Josh Jackson played better in this game. He's the guy that obviously should be taking it. Jamal Crawford is the guy that almost wrecked this thing for him. But Kelly Oubre, I mean, everywhere you look, everybody did better than expected. That's sort of what you're looking at there. The reason that I liked Tyler Johnson is that they're just force-feeding him minutes. So, outside of the games where he just doesn't take many shots, and he's sort of not going to make many if he's not taking many, this was a little bit more reasonable. A 3-pointer, some defensive stats. That's why we had picked him up. Rebounds, assists, defensive stats, and threes. Not for scoring, not for the percentages. He did it on 0 turnovers as well, so that's also a little bit on the cool side. But this certainly bought him a little more time. And the simple fact is he's a point guard logging 30-plus minutes a game on a garbage team. So somehow he's going to have to find his way to anything. Some kind of fantasy value. We hope. Knicks at Kings. The Knicks took until the second half for our guy Mitchell Robinson to get a block. Otherwise, this team is a disaster. I know Alonzo Trier had a big game, and Dennis Smith Jr. looked serviceable in this one. He actually had a pretty good ball game, but on a night-to-night basis, it's a disaster out there. I'm not trusting anybody besides Mitchell Robinson. I don't know if DeAndre Jordan's going to play the rest of the way, but if he does, I would trust him too. For the Kings, we've seen Harrison Barnes pick it up a little bit since the injury to Marvin Bagley, particularly on the glass. That's where they needed help with no Bagley around. Barnes had a 14-rebound game in there. He also had a 10-rebound game in this one. But otherwise, his stat lines are pretty empty. I'm not racing out to pick him up. I just am not overly concerned with it. I'd rather hope Bagley comes back in another week and a half or so, and then he goes back to being a pumpkin. And finally, the Clippers and the Lakers. The Lakers, I suggest they should be tanking. They claim they're trying to win, but I think it's the most clever tank job of the season. The fans are beside themselves, livid. I'm looking more at this from a big picture standpoint, and the closer they get to a decent draft pick, the better the package they could put together in the offseason. But that's not the point of this show. We're talking fantasy stuff. Patrick Beverley, still playing great basketball. Gallo looked good. Lou Williams. Montrez missed his free throws, but did have a double-double with 5 assists. And that's basically it. I know Gilgeous-Alexander had a slightly better ball game, but he didn't get to close in this one, which obviously hurt whatever fantasy value he might have been looking for. And for the Lakers, JaVale McGee probably should have played more than he did. They tried to go small often. It didn't work. Kyle Kuzma got beat up. Josh Hart actually did a really good job to fight with bigger guys all game long. They don't have the personnel. And obviously starting Rajon Rondo is worth throwing into your fantasy lineups. He's been putting together big fantasy lines. But again, it's just that's where it stops. It's big fantasy lines and not a lot else. 5 turnovers. He gives up a lot on the defensive end as well. Can't really blame him for this one, though. This was on a lot of guys, and he wasn't one of them. Rough times are these. Rough times are these for Laker fans. But again, look at the bright side. You draw ever closer to a top 10 pick on a season where you had LeBron James. Probably never thought that was going to happen. But you can certainly feel the wind coming out of the sails. This is air out of the balloon, so on and so forth, whatever you want to call it for this Laker team. Let's take a look at what's going on Tuesday night in the association. Another 6-gamer. I mean, this is... Okay, so earlier in the year, I complained that there were too many fluctuations in how many games there were on every day of the week. And then I said I wanted every day to be a 6-game day. Now that we have these podcasts that change in length over the course of the week, I'd really prefer it if we had days where there were big cards and little cards. Anyway, doesn't matter. Orlando is in Philadelphia. Jonah Bolden is now questionable, so it's possible that Philly's going to be without all 3 of their center-eligible players. Or 4, right? Amir Johnson, too? I don't even know what the heck they're going to do in the front court in this one. Jimmy Butler missed practice with a back injury, but he was not on the injury report. So I'm going to go ahead and assume he's fine and will be playing, unless I hear otherwise. Chicago in Indiana. The Bulls basically half-rested themselves in that last game against Atlanta. This one should be a bit more normal. I'm loving on Robin Lopez these days. I think Chris Dunn seeing more time with the second unit is a good thing for him and for the Bulls. Zach LaVine is fine. Lauri Markkanen is fine. And that's about as far as that needs to go. So not much we're paying attention to out there. Indiana, also a squad we're not paying close attention to these days. One eye on Wesley Matthews, I guess. He's been that top 100, top 120 kind of guy that we figured he would be. Better. I thought Reggie Bullock might outperform him because of the prospect of defensive stats. I rescind that. I'm going to walk that one back. Bullock is now sort of at the bottom of that chart. Well, Alan Crabb is at the bottom of that chart. But Reggie just not consistent enough with the very few opportunities that the Lakers offense is affording him. Is just too far down the pecking order. I thought he would get a bunch of open threes, but he's been so reticent to take them. And the Lakers spacing is so clunky that it just kind of doesn't matter. Houston is in Toronto. Interested to see what's going on with Kenneth Faried. I think he'll probably play in this game. He was, I believe, considered close in the last one, and it's been a couple of days, but we shall see. Toronto, this is also an interesting matchup situation. Is Marc Gasol going to get the lion's share of minutes? Clint Capella is the center most of the time for the Houston Rockets, which is kind of partway in between very big and not so big, but he doesn't spread the floor. So this will be an interesting test. We've seen Marc Gasol's minutes ramping up lately. Does that continue here? I would expect that it will, but we'll have to wait and see for sure. Elsewhere with Houston, back on the Kenneth Faried thing, I know we jumped over to Marc Gasol pretty quickly. I've said it before, I don't think Kenneth Faried is a standard league traditional value in the role he's going to have with this Rockets team now that Capella is back and getting healthy. But that doesn't mean that he can't find a usefulness on your fantasy team, because as I mentioned on yesterday's show, all of these pickups are about filling statistical gaps in your team. Faried could do that with field goal percent, some rebounds, maybe a smattering of steals and blocks. You have to hope he doesn't hurt you too much in free throws. Just don't take them. Please don't get fouled. But if he's playing, if he's with the first unit, that might not actually be a great thing for him. Maybe get him in there with the second unit with Chris Paul to start the second quarter. Could be kind of cool. He'd be the role man there as opposed to being a power forward alongside Capella. It's too many guys rolling to the rim. Portland is in Memphis. There are storylines in this one as well. We'll be watching Enes Kanter to see how he bounces back. Had kind of a quiet one his last time out. Again, he's your center pickup if you need percentages and some points and rebounds, not defensive stats. He will not get you any of those. On the opposite side, you've got the Memphis Grizzlies, where what if Mike Conley starts to get shut down? I know he got a game off for load management. We still have a little over a month left in the season, so we're not in full shutdown territory yet. But you saw how good Delon Wright looked when Conley was out. That's a guy that should be firmly on your radar, if you haven't picked him up already, as someone that could take off if given a little bit of extra opportunity. He's close even without it. He's a really interesting fantasy prospect, but he needs a little bit more wiggle room. And he doesn't have it yet. Avery Bradley is your low floor, low ceiling, or high floor, low ceiling kind of guy on that team. He's been scoring at a low efficiency clip outside of that one really big ball game where he shot 58%. He's been making his free throws, so that's been helpful for him. But it's a weird dynamic with Bradley. He's top 100 despite all the points he's been pouring in, because the high volume 44% shooting has really hurt. The other stuff is actually fine. 17, 4, and 4. That's reasonable numbers in the popcorn stuff. He does have a steal in that mix. Pretty safe ad if that's the type of stuff your team needs. If you need some free throws going in, if you need some three-pointers, a smattering of assists, some points, there's a usefulness for that. All of these things have a usefulness. Every one of these players, bad though they may be, has a spot where they could be interesting. So that's Memphis. Oklahoma City, it sounds like Paul George is going to miss this game, so that sucks. Not much to grab onto with that club. Minnesota, Robert Covington is out for this ball game, but he hasn't been ruled out for the second half of their back-to-back coming up tomorrow. That's the one that I'm watching. If he gets back in there and plays, 12 to 16 minutes or whatever it is, it could be the start of something beautiful. A lot of you, however, are in your playoffs, and if that's the case, you waited this time, it's going to hurt like heck, but you got to dump him anyway. I know, soul-crushing stuff. Boston, not interested. Golden State, not interested. That's what's going on Tuesday night. I want to take one more moment here at the end of the podcast to remind everybody to please rate and review the podcast. I know that's our big thing right now. I'm going to remind you a couple of times during the show. If you love it, even better. If you hate it, just tell me on Twitter. Because, like I said, I really do take all criticism constructive, as long as it's, well thought out and something that you considered. I take it all seriously. I put it all in the bank. The criticism we got very early on in this podcast was that we spent too much time just BSing at the beginning. And I looked around, I realized a lot of podcasts actually had that same problem. I thought, here's what we got to do. 2 to 3 minutes max at the start of the show, unless there's something special going on, in which case I'll preface it by saying, hey, we got some things we need to discuss here at the beginning. But getting into the fantasy stuff quick, I hope that you guys appreciate this. I know I still BS a little bit at the start of the show when I have guests on. Brew and I generally get off topic a little more than most. Yeah, we're all buddies. This is what you got to deal with. But for the most part, I really think that I've done a better job of trying to get into the stuff. So again, if you have thoughts of things that you really think can improve the show, tell me. Hit me up, man. I really take it all to heart. But if you like it the way it is, even if you think there's some stuff that needs to be fixed. Drop us a nice note when you're reviewing the pod and throw them 5 stars our way. We'll really appreciate that. Coming up tomorrow on the podcast, we'll talk to Micah Patrio. We got a DFS contest coming up middle of the week, don't we? Man, I almost forgot that was happening. So stay tuned. We'll get those links out shortly. And that is your Tuesday Halfer edition here on Fantasy NBA Today. I am Dan Baspers. Enjoy the short card with implications. Pickups and drops abound. Stream if you're in the playoffs. Hunt categories if you're not. We will update you once again mañana. So long, everybody.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.